Hey guys, what's going on? My name is Tuuvas and welcome back to The Sluggers. In today's video, we're going to be going over some tips and tricks for CCIP bombing in the AV-8B Harrier by Razbam simulations. The mission we are using is an air-to-ground practice mission that comes with the Harrier. This is a very straightforward mission. There are some basic ground targets out by the red smoke in front of us, and we have Mark 82s plus rockets to practice with. That said, we will only be using the Mark 82s today. But before that, we need to make sure we've got all the necessary controls bound for our mission. First up, and probably the most important, is the pickle or bomb button. This is what will allow us to actually drop a bomb, which is quite important for a bombing mission. By default, this is right alt plus spacebar. Secondly, we will need to make sure we have all of our TDC controls set, and those are TDC aft, down, left, right, and up. TDC aft by default is J on the keyboard. TDC down or action is N by default. This is going to be your control for locking an area on the ground with your DMT. This is especially useful for finding targets. TDC forward is U by default. TDC left is Y by default. And finally, TDC right is I by default. Next up are your sensor selects. So you want to bind sensor select aft by default. This is left Windows key plus J on the keyboard. Sensor select down or action is left Windows key plus N by default. Sensor select forward is left Windows key plus U by default. Sensor select left is left Windows key plus Y by default. And finally, sensor select right is left Windows key plus I by default. And of course, last but not least is going to be the nose wheel steering button or air to ground target undesignate, and that is right Windows key plus N. Now before we run into the target area, let's make sure we're fully fenced in. Make sure master arm is set, air-to-ground master mode is set, ensure that your Mark 82s are selected in the stores page on your multi-purpose color display, and finally make sure your Mark 82s are actually armed, because although a quarter-ton piece of metal falling at terminal velocity or faster is nothing to laugh at, it pales in comparison to the explosive alternative. Make sure it's armed. With us now locked, armed, and ready to go, our next job is to actually find the targets. In this mission, Razbam was kind enough to set 4 red smoke markers to help us find the general target area. But that's about all we get. It is our job to actually find those targets and then deal with them. While it is indeed possible to spot targets as I'm showing here, we didn't actually begin seeing them until we were practically flying right over the target area. Needless to say, this is at least a bit more difficult to do when lining up a CCIP drop from 6 miles away at Angels 10. This is when our good old Mark 1 eyeball becomes less dependable, and we begin relying on the onboard systems and hardware in our Harrier. That said, let's extend out to about 6 miles and climb to at least 10,000 feet. Alright, now that we're at 10,000 feet, let's wait until we're at least 6 miles away before we turn back around. As we turn, we also pitch up to around plus 10 degrees. This allows us to gain a bit more altitude, but it also allows us to slow ourselves down before we turn towards the target area. As we approach the target area, we want to be moving slow to give ourselves as much time as we need to find targets to hit. So to help us along with that idea, we're also going to be throttling down to decrease our airspeed even further. Just keep in mind, you don't want to slow down too much because then you'll start stalling, which no one wants to do, especially with a heavy loadout like this. Now because we're so far away, it's going to be a little hard to spot targets, so luckily we have a FLIR or forward-looking IR display, as well as a DMT, which is a fixed x6 zoom camera on the nose of our aircraft. Now one thing to keep in mind is that trees actually do return an IR signature, so sometimes you'll be looking at a tree when you thought that was actually a tank or an APC in the distance. And as you can see from this little run-in, we get kind of confused by trees and end up not finding a target until we're too close to the target area, which results in us needing to turn around and try again. Alright, now that we are turned back around and 6 miles out, plus around 10,000 to 11,000 feet, we will use our forward-looking IR display to line up this flight path marker with any potential targets of interest as indicated by the hotspots on the FLIR Once we line up the flight path marker, we can press the TDC action button, which will freeze the DMT on the target area, and we can just simply slew the crosshair over a potential target. Now let's assume we don't actually care about this target, and we will hit NWS, or the air-to-ground target undesignate button, and we can simply repeat this process all over again. And sure enough, we found yet another target, so let's slew it back over, but let's just assume we don't want that again, and let's find a third target just for the fun of it. Let's move the crosshair over here, press it, and we're a little too far down, let's correct it, and just like that we found a third target. Easy peasy. Now, looking at the DMT, we can actually confirm this is a APC of some sort. It is a light armor vehicle. It will indeed need a Mark 82 to kill it. We could use guns if we wanted, but we're practicing CCIP bomb drops today. Unfortunately, we are way too close to the target area, so let's go ahead and extend back out to 6 miles and 10,000 feet once again, and begin our run-in for a CCIP Mark 82 bomb drop on that target. As we're extending farther out, there are two issues I wanted to point out. The first issue is related to navigating away and then back to the stores page. Sometimes the fusing setting goes back to safe, as seen here, and then you are forced to fix it by reselecting nose-tail fusing. The second issue is that we're not currently configured for a CCIP. If you intend to run in for a CCIP bomb drop, ensure your drop mode is set to CIP and not AUT or Auto, which is intended for CCRP. Now that we're plenty more than 6 miles out and at 10,000 feet, we're going to go ahead and turn in for our bombing run on the target we found earlier. As before, we are making sure we climb a bit into the turn to give ourselves more altitude, but this also in turn slows us down to give us more time for the run into the target. The more time we give ourselves to line up with the target, the more accurate we will be when it comes time to actually drop the bomb on said target. With a target on our HUD, it is time to level out at 10,000 and begin lining up for our bomb drop. Our goal right now is to simply stay level at 10,000 and keep aligned with the on-HUD box until we are roughly 3 miles away from our target. Now obviously, as seen here, we will come to a point where we can no longer see the target on our HUD. This is fine since we know we are heading mostly in the same direction as we were before, so we will continue this course until we are just about 3 miles out. As you can see, I am performing my final run-in checks, making sure my master arm is on, air-to-ground mode is set, fusing is good, countermeasures and RWR is set. I've also noticed that I'm a little below 10,000 feet altitude, so I'm going to climb a bit while I've still got more than a mile or so to go before I begin my dive. Now that I'm back at 10,000, all I'm waiting for now is to hit that 3-mile mark. Alright, and now we're beginning our dive. If you notice, I'm actually going inverted to help myself put the target square back on my HUD, so once I find it, I level back out and just begin waiting for the CCIP crosshair to show on the HUD. And as part of good practice when running into an area that you aren't quite familiar with, it's actually a good idea to make sure you start flaring once you begin your dive towards the target. With the crosshair now on the HUD, it is our job to kind of slow the creep of the crosshair so that it becomes a solid line and then pickle. This is what allows us to make sure that the bomb drop is as accurate as possible. And of course, as we start turning away from the target area, we want to make sure we continue to flare and also keep our eyes on the target to ensure that we got a good shack. As nice as the FLIR is, sometimes we just want our MPCD for other purposes. For example, our stores page to keep track of how many bombs we have left. In this case, we can actually still use the FLIR by projecting it onto our HUD instead. To do this, we can look below our upfront controller and find the HUD display mode switch. This has 3 settings: day, auto, and night. For this purpose, we will set it to night. With the target area back in sight, let's go ahead and project the FLIR onto our HUD using sensor select down. This provides us with the same IR signature detection ability, except now it is overlaid onto our HUD for easier use. Same as before, simply move the flight path marker over a potential target of interest, press the TDC down or action key, and then slew the DMT crosshair over your desired target. And from here it is up to you if you want to engage your target, so let's go ahead and go in for our bombing run. right, and shack. Good kill. I hope you all found this AV-8B Harrier CCIP tips and tricks video useful. If you have any suggestions on how I can make these videos better, please do let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to leave a like. If you really liked it and would like to see more of this kind of stuff, make sure to hit that subscribe button. And tune in next time for some more DCS World tips, tricks, and guides. Alright guys, catch you all later. In the meantime, I'm going to leave you with my sad attempts at some rocket passes against these same targets.